It didn't look like failure. Not at first. There were no sirens, no collapse, just more applause, more chants, more belief. But that's how it always is. The fall doesn't feel like falling until it's over. Napoleon didn't think he was losing. He was still marching, still speaking of glory, still surrounded by generals who smiled and nodded, until he was standing alone on a battlefield soaked in rain and silence. And it was over. Trump didn't think he was done. He had rallies, he had flags, he had people. Until the final doors closed, the microphones were unplugged, and even his allies walked away. And still he said, "I won." Because that's the curse of certain leaders. They don't fall like the rest. They fall believing they're still rising. Let's go back. Napoleon, after Russia, after the decimation of his army, could have stepped back, could have rebuilt, could have negotiated peace. But he didn't. Because to him, retreat wasn't strategy, it was weakness. And he couldn't be weak. Not now. Not after all the victories. Not after all the myth-making. So he returned to battle. Again. Until Waterloo. Even then, he believed in victory. Even as the sky turned gray and cannon fire roared against him, he still believed. Because he had to. Because the idea of losing had no place left to live inside his mind. Trump, after the election, could have conceded, could have pivoted, could have protected his legacy. But he didn't. Because to him, loss wasn't part of the plan, wasn't part of the story. And if the story didn't make room for losing, then it must not be true. So he kept going, kept tweeting, kept speaking, kept rallying. And still, millions believed him. Because when a leader refuses to fall, they can convince others to float, even as the ground crumbles. This is the psychology of illusory victory. It feels real, it looks real, until reality interrupts. Let's go deeper. What makes some leaders believe they're still winning, even when the evidence screams otherwise? It's not stupidity. It's not even arrogance. It's investment. Napoleon had invested everything: his reputation, his country, his soldiers, his identity, into the idea of triumph. So to accept failure wasn't just political suicide, it was self-erasure. Same with Trump. His brand wasn't built on balance. It was built on domination, on winning. Everything I touch turns to gold. Only I can fix it. Make America great again. If he lost, the brand collapsed, the myth unraveled. So he fought, not just for power, but for his narrative. And when you fight for the narrative, you become blind to reality. You don't see the falling, you only see the cheering. Because in echo chambers, there is no gravity. Napoleon heard only loyalty. Trump read only support. Both mistook noise for truth. And so they marched. Let's look at the signs of this illusion. Napoleon returns from exile in 1815. The people cheer. The army rejoins him. The 100 days begin. He sees this as confirmation. France still loves me. Europe still fears me. I am back. But beneath the cheers, the world had moved on. And as Waterloo approached, the illusion held. Even as alliances formed, even as resources ran dry, even as generals warned him, he still believed, I can win this. Trump sees crowds, he sees flags, he hears USA, USA. So he believes, I still have the people, I still have the power, I am still president. But beneath the noise, laws were clear, votes were counted, allies were gone. And yet, the illusion held, because the alternative was too painful to accept. Let's pause here. This isn't just about ego, it's about momentum. Once you've built your life on constant ascent, stopping feels like crashing. So you keep going, even if it leads off a cliff. Napoleon thought he was rebuilding France. He was marching into his last defeat. Trump thought he was restoring America. He was inciting a riot. But both truly, deeply believed they were winning, because no one told them otherwise, or if they did, they were ignored. Because when the myth is big enough, truth becomes invisible. Let's talk about the supporters. Why do people cheer as the fall unfolds? Because they see what the leader sees: hope, defiance, pride. And more than that, they see themselves in the story. Napoleon wasn't just a general, he was their general. Trump wasn't just a candidate, he was their voice. So when the leader says, "We're still winning," they want to believe it. Because if he's wrong, what does that make them? Followers of failure? Believers in lies? No. Better to double down. Better to shout louder. Better to march further. Because illusion offers comfort. Truth demands grief. And grief is heavy. So they cling to victory, even as it burns, until the smoke clears and there's nothing left to hold. Let's look at the aftermath. Napoleon is exiled again, this time permanently. He dies on a distant island, still speaking of greatness, still convinced history will vindicate him. Trump is out of office, banned, investigated, but still running, still claiming, still rewriting. And millions still believe. Because myths don't die with the man. They linger, they echo, and sometimes they return. That's why it matters. Because the illusion of victory is powerful, but it's also deadly. It blinds, it consumes, it traps even the brightest minds in their own reflection. So what do we learn? We learn that strength is not the same as invincibility, that volume is not the same as truth, that momentum is not the same as direction, and that sometimes the ones who fall hardest are the ones who thought they were still flying. So the next time a leader says, "We cannot lose," ask, "What if we already have?" The next time the crowd cheers louder, look around. See if the ground is still there. Because the fall doesn't feel like falling until the silence comes. And by then, it's too late to land safely.